Let me just pull up my notes here. My name is Joel Whitney. It's a delight to see you all for this discussion of the One Straw Revolution, part of our Climate Read series, which is a year-long book discussion monthly, where we alternate between fiction and nonfiction. And it was conceived by the folks at Writers Rebel New York City, and we're so happy to be working with them. And tonight we have Will Harris, Amanda Little, and Jess Turner, who will talk about the book for a bit, and then we turn completely to you. And we rely on your questions, your comments, starting at about 7:30 or so, 7:25, whenever you're chomping at the bit to talk. The One Straw Revolution is by Masanobu Fukuoka, and it's a really unique book. It was out with, I think, Rodale Press originally, and our friends at the New York Review have redone it, and we're happy to be working with them as well. I also just want to shout out to Greenlight Bookstore, who's selling the book for us for this event, and you can grab a copy if you don't have one already, and join sort of spiritually now, and sort of find more details when you read the book later on. We're going to be led very handily by Amanda Little, who's a journalist, professor of journalism and science writing at Vanderbilt University. She's the author of The Fate of Food, What We'll Eat in a Bigger, Hotter, Smarter World, a 5-year adventure into the lands, minds, and machines shaping the future of sustainable food. And we're going to drop their bios into the chat so you can see the amazing accomplishments of the folks who are going to be part of this conversation today, as a segue into your thoughts. So without any further ado, please snap and clap and give emojis and welcome Amanda Little.
I'll snap for the team here, and to my panelists, and to Joel and Elliot. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am lived in Brooklyn for a long time, and I'm feeling very nostalgic just being in your virtual presence. It's really such a beautiful community. I'm so happy to be a part of it, and I greatly admire Will Harris and Jess Turner. So it's an honor to be with them and to discuss this extraordinary book with them. I will say that as I was cramming the last 20 pages of the book earlier today, my daughter walked in and said, "Mom, you look uncharacteristically serene." She didn't say the uncharacteristically part, but she did say the serene part, and I think that really has. This is a book that I loved to read. I just got so much peace and solace from the reading experience, even when cramming. And I did, linger over the first, let's say, 80 pages of it. And as someone who teaches science writing, I found the way that this book addressed science and really kind of decentered science was a beautiful surprise to me. I've read this book a long while ago, and now to read it again, it was just an amazing delight. So I'm so excited to read it. I have the pleasure of having been to the farm of Will Harris, and I am very much looking forward to visiting the apothecary of Jess Turner. Let me introduce you to them very briefly, and then we'll jump in to a conversation with them about sustainable food and agriculture, and about Masanobu Fukuoka's do nothing principles, how they can be applied to food production and also to our lives. Will Harris is a 4th generation cattleman who tends the same land that his great grandfather settled in 1866. In the mid 1990s, Will became disenchanted with the excesses of industrial methods he'd been practicing with his father. They had raised cattle with pesticides, herbicides, hormones, and antibiotics, but he shifted back to the practices of his great grandfather, and he came to realize that he had created a monoculture, and that nature abhors monoculture. And he now manages thousands of acres in southern Georgia and raises everything from cattle and chickens to goats, rabbits, and Iberian pigs. And the food he raises is absolutely delicious, I can attest. And White Oak Pastures, you should visit the website, drop it in there, Elliot, and start ordering some of the food as he's talking, because it is exceptionally delicious. Jess Turner has farmed on land from Hawaii to the Bronx. She is an herbalist, grower, and educator. She helped steward 20 acres of public land in Manhattan along the Hudson River, and will be growing herbal medicine in East New York this upcoming season. Her apothecary, Olamina Botanicals, is another just trove of wonderful and delicious and healthful things. And so go and check that out again in the chat. Her work with plants is centered on helping frontline communities, low-income, working class, and BIPOC communities who experience the first and worst impacts of climate change, and building land-based resilience practices. So Will and Jess, please add to what I have shared, and I'm going to invite you both to unmute yourselves. And I want to start with this. I would love to hear how Fukuoka's philosophies resonate with the work you do. Beyond the practical tips are these philosophical aspects of the book that we can all apply to our lives. And your lives are uniquely apropos, in your work is this book is uniquely apropos of your work and lives. But tell us how this book resonates with what you do. Yes. Will, let's start with you, and then Jess, jump in.
Oh, okay. So, I was struck by the similarities of the work I do, the way I farm, my view of the regenerative land management, how similar they were to Mr. Fukura's. I was, as you pointed out, I was a very industrial farmer. What I read, the similarity was that in the industrialization of agriculture, Western agriculture particularly, we took a very complex system that's guided by cycles and turned it into a very complicated system that's very linear. And we did that for the purpose, my father's generation and mine in this country post-World War II, we turned it into something that's very linear for the purposes of making it efficient and at the cost of resilience. And that was made crystal clear to us in the pandemic panic that we had about this time last year. And so much of what he said regarding the land management, the approach, working with nature as opposed to in opposition to nature, really resonated with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Jess.
Yeah, so I love everything that has been shared so far, and thanks everyone for being here. I first read The One Straw Revolution about 7 years ago when I quit a kind of really stressful job in the city and went and moved to an organic farm. This book was on the shelf at that farm, and the person who established the farm and many of the folks who he had started farming with in the 70s were deeply inspired by this book. And in terms of philosophical resonance and also coming back to this book and reading it more closely than I had in a number of years was really surprising to me, because so many of the ideas that I was exposed to what feels like, a while ago for me, have become really important to the work that I do. So it was really nice to look at them more closely. And, what Fukuoka talks about in One Straw Revolution is really about witnessing, bearing witness to nature, honoring the earth's processes and understanding ourselves as humans as, just one part of a really intricate web of life. And, if we look at where agriculture in the United States and many other parts of the West are today, if we look at our relationship to the rest of the natural world, these relationships are very much built on, human centeredness, on ego, and on hubris. And, over and over again in this book, Fukuoka, is humbled. He's humbled by the land. He's humbled by, his attempts over the course of decades to perfect his farming practice. And at the end of the day, what he settles on is that, nature knows best. And so I think for me, the resonance here, what resonates most strongly is in bearing witness to the earth and in the work that we do to bring ourselves as humans back into balance with the rest of the natural world, in looking to the earth for our cues. What do we find in nature? We find mutualism, we find democracy, we find multiplicity, we find complexity, we find polyculture. And all of those principles, are crucial to healthy communities amongst humans as well. So I think for me, this idea of witnessing nature and honoring nature, and also part of what I think Fukuoka is saying is, us as humans recognizing ourselves as not separate from nature, but part of it.
Jess, I love that phrasing, that he calls the bearing witness to nature. He says in so many different ways that his, over decades of work, he learned a simplicity. He learned a way of seeing without thinking. And that bearing witness wasn't about thought. It was about intuition. It was about all that is invoked in the phrasing of bearing witness.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I kept going back and just to make sure that he had written this 43 years ago, because it feels so relevant today.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you, Jess, about that, about the fact that this, there are moments when this feels out of step with where we are today. But there are moments when it feels incredibly prescient and much more relevant today than it was in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that?
Sure. So I think one of the more kind of jarring, in a good way, observations that Fukuoka makes over and over in the book is about consumer preference, and about, almost like extravagance. And, he talks about how he sends citrus to market. When he first started sending his citrus to market, he got a lot of pushback because people were like, hey, these aren't the perfect mandarins that we've come to expect. And, elsewhere at other stalls, you had those larger, more perfect mandarin that were achieved through methods that honestly weren't the best for the land, fetching a higher price. And I think, I don't currently make the entirety of my living farming or growing food, but at times over the last few years I have. And even, when people have known that whatever farm I'm working for is organic, you still see them, sifting through the pile of whatever produce is on offer and leaving the smaller produce behind. And I think, really this idea of us interrogating our consumer desire, our desire for some approximation of perfection that doesn't necessarily exist, using more natural or organic methods is really important to think about. And also to that end, where Fukuoka talks about organic produce, or what he calls produce grown through natural methods, the fact that, you know, in many parts of the United States, these goods are considered, I mean, they're luxury items. They
Mhm.
are, they're priced, you know, such that many people are unable to afford them, or there's sort of energy around these goods that they are not for everyone, they're only for certain people. So I think that those two concepts really resonate with me, as well as, you know, all throughout the book, Fukuoka again and again critiques the way that the government and agribusiness collude to keep pesticides and herbicides going into the ground. And that dynamic is still very much present in this country. So yeah, those are three things that come to mind.
Yeah, I want to talk further about the concerns around the, you know, elitism of the sustainable food movement or the clean food movement, and his, you know, emphasis on pricing. He actually said food produced without without agrochemicals and inputs should be cheaper. It should be less expensive, and you know, so it's really a stark contrast to where, you know, to so many of the assumptions around food produced through regenerative and sustainable farming today. And so I do want to get to that. Will, let's get back to the dramatic shift you made as an industrial farmer who chose to shift to regenerative practices. Fukuoka has a very dramatic, you know, in the first 10 pages, he describes this epiphany where true nature stood revealed. You know, he was shaken awake from this, you know, from actually literally passing out into this kind of utopia and this extraordinary faith in nature, that decentered him as a human, and put, you know, this great faith in natural systems and great suspicion around human knowledge and science. Can you talk about your own you know, epiphany or awakening around this and how that took place?
I can. So I came to it from a very different direction, Mr. Fukuoka. My father was a very successful industrial cattleman, commodity centralized industrial cattleman. I went to the University of Georgia, majored in animal science, graduated in 1976 when it was purely a reductionist science program. I came home and ran the farm that way for 20 years and was financially comfortable, but the excesses of that production system bothered me more and more as I became increasingly aware of the unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Those unintended consequences of using those tools were unpleasant consequences, and they were unnoticed consequences. And whereas I loved them in my 20s, by the time I got in my 40s, I was starting to put it together and not being happy with it. And it caused me to move away from it. And that was 25 years ago, and we're still moving away from it. You know, I thought Jess stated it beautifully about how the hubris came in and over and over in the writing. And you know, we industrial farmers that I used to be part of believe that reductionist science can answer any question and tell us anything. And the humility of him over and over and over reporting that there are things that we are not capable of knowing was very refreshing to me.
Will, when visiting your farm, there was an amazing moment for me when we stood on the border of your farm and a neighbor's farm. and we became that, I was able to see without thinking. But there was also some pretty extraordinary evidence when we took a handful of soil on your farm and a handful of soil on the farm next door that was farmed industrially, two totally different kinds of soil. You've also been able to, describe some of what's visible in the, in the water after a rain, the kind of erosion that comes off of your neighboring industrial farms, and that doesn't occur on your farms. Can you talk about that? What's visibly different about the living ecosystems on your farm and neighboring farms?
I can. The best way I can tell you is that phenomenon that you're talking about being able to visually see the difference in the soil is pretty much untouched by man, and the dirt that has been degraded by chemical fertilizers and pesticides and cultivation is one of the first things that struck me. And you don't have to be real smart to see if you like this and you don't like this, then you should start treating what you don't like in a manner that makes it look like what you do like. Even a University of Georgia College of Agriculture guy can figure that out. So that's what I did. And truly over the next 25 years, visually the land is different for the reasons you said and others. And we had a life cycle assessment, LCA, run by a third-party environmental engineering firm. And it showed that the two pieces of land that you are referring to, on our side of the fence, it's 5% organic matter. And on the other side of the fence, it is 0.5% organic matter. And that is an incredible difference. But I didn't need the scientists to tell me that. And I can see it driving by my field at 40 miles an hour. It's just physically a very different ecosystem.
It's profoundly important today. In particular, what Fukuoka could not have seen in the 70s was, this incredible planetary crisis that has, week by week become only more urgent, which is climate change. And that matter, that deep, rich soil that you are managing, the lands you're managing, is drawing down and locking carbon into the soil. And functioning as a natural carbon sink, a natural way of sequestering carbon. Nature, I'm going to just take this. This is my copy of the book, which probably looks like many of yours. But I'm going to take this and bring it back to you, Jess. This passage, which I think Wendell Berry notes in his intro, that Fukuoka returns to again and again, which is just, the hubris of science and the inaccuracies of science. He says, nature as grasped by scientific knowledge is a nature which has been destroyed. It is a ghost possessing a skeleton, but no soul. This is something that we need. I really would love to hear your thoughts on, Will and Jess. We are in this moment when respect for science has never been more important, right? I mean, we need to restore faith and respect in science on the heels of a devastating of an administration that deeply disrespected science as it relates to vaccines, as it relates to climate change, and so forth. And here we are reading this book that asks us to actually decenter science, right? Not only decenter humans, decenter human knowledge as expressed through science. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Jess, at first, and then go back to you, Will, on that. How much should we be, heeding and respecting science right now, and how much should we be rejecting science right now?
Wow, that's great question. Part of what comes up for me in thinking about that is, going back to the book, how much Fukuoka critiques specialization, right? Amongst scientists the discipline of science amongst scientists and amongst society. And he comes again and again back to the fact that, 50 years before he writes the book, well over half of the Japanese population engaged in farming, and those efforts were the basis from which those households fed themselves. And he relates various stories about how these families would spend a few months in the winter hunting rabbits to help supplement whatever crops they had grown. And that eventually, and maybe the practice was like looked down upon by certain folks, like, oh, you all have to go hunt rabbits. But the fact of the matter was, during that rabbit hunt, the folks on the hunt could stop and look up at the sky and notice a constellation. And because they did a bit of farming and a bit of rabbit hunting and had free time, they could compose haiku. And he talks about finding, I can't remember where, like maybe a monastery, or I can't remember where, sorry, finding a bunch of haiku that had been written by, humble farmers. And about how, when we begin, when mechanization comes into the picture, and or less about mechanization, when there's this idea that, farming, growing our own food is beneath us, and we should be progressing, we should be expanding, we should be doing more productive things with our time, we should be doing things that bring more income to self or to the nation. What happens is that people have less free time. You move away from people, seeing themselves as astronomers, because they don't have time to understand what's happening in the sky, and they don't have time to witness what is happening on their land. And, I'm not sure if he links this directly, but from my understanding of what he's talking about, part of what he's talking about is a process where the investigation of nature is only done by people in like white lab coats who aren't talking to the people who are growing food. And he talks about that again and again, about how there are these, highly specialized plant scientists who come and visit his fields all the time, and they take one discrete measurement and then go back into their lab, and they don't even come back and check in with him.
Yeah.
It's like irrelevant.
Right. And what I hear you saying, Jess, is that he's not so much impugning science, he's impugning a narrow application of science in specialized ways that limits, that steals time, that limits a breadth of vision. And that quells and subdues and suffocates instinct and intuition.
Right.
And so it's sort of like a bit of a gambit. Like, he's not saying, look, you shouldn't develop vaccines to address the coronavirus and distribute them effectively, which one could argue is sort of in there. But no, he's really saying, if it suffocates your ability to think holistically and see and subdue thinking for that sort of breadth of vision, for that bearing witness, then science imperils humanity rather than advances humanity. Will, this is something that you said long before you read and we discussed this book. You said, you cannot believe the number of scientists who come to my farm and start, taking measurements of everything, and it drives me crazy. Can you tell us about that, and to what extent you think science can help regenerative farming, and to what extent it can hurt regenerative farming?
I do think that science can help regenerative farming, but it's unquestionable science has hurt regenerative farming. We practice holistic management here, and in that we recognize complex and complicated systems as being very different. This this iPhone is a complicated piece of equipment. It'll do a lot of things, but if one component ceases to operate, it's game over. It doesn't work anymore. Your body or the federal government are complex systems. A lot of things going on to make it work. But if one component ceases to operate, things morph and it continues to function. Reductionist science works great on complicated systems. It's how we're on the internet here and got people on the moon and Mars or wherever. It doesn't work so well on complex systems because of those unintended consequences that result that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Agribusiness, multi-trillion-dollar agribusiness has monetized reductionist science to correct symptoms in the complex system given unintended consequences. So, so complex is linear and scalable.
You mean
complicated? I'm sorry.
Complicated is linear and
scalable and can be made efficient. Complex is cyclical, and it's replicatable, and it's resilient. So it's two very different systems. We applied the science where it shouldn't have been applied, and the consequences were bad, and it took us a long time to notice them. So I think that recognizing the cyclical nature is the first step, and I think that most of us are a long way from that.
This is such an important point, that notion that complex agricultural systems are replicable but not scalable, because so much of agriculture has gone the road of 10,000 acre farms, even 20,000 acre farms, right? And that's been crucial to the conversation about equitable distribution of food and affordable food, right? But what if we shifted to smaller scale regenerative farms that could be replicated in and around population centers, not in, but certainly near, right? And Will, can you just describe that, what you told me in a previous conversation, that that something like White Oak Pastures, which is, am I right, it's about 3,000 acres of pasture land?
3,200.
3,200 acres could be replicated. 2-3 of the farms that is, your farm is in southeastern Georgia. 2-3 of these farms we should have in every state.
Every county.
I think
that the basic premise of our farm is high animal welfare and regenerative land management and the rural economy building. The first two were very thoughted, conscious decisions, very purposeful. We made decisions about how we wanted to do it different, studied it, implemented changes. Some worked, some didn't. Rethought it, changed something else, and we're still doing it. And as a result, the farm went from 3 minimum wage employees to 170 something employees that make way over the county average. That third part, the impact of the local rural economy, was unintended, unthought. It just organically happened when we did the right things for the land and the animals. The community became relevant again. Industrialized, centralized commodity agriculture rendered rural America irrelevant. It just wasn't needed anymore, so it dried up.
Yes, and I see some comments in the chat around the size and what would be an optimal size for a regenerative farm. Is it 200 acres? Is it 150? Is it 1,000? Is it 2,000? And I don't know. I know we don't want to get too much in the weeds there, but can you speak to that? What is optimal? I know you've grown your farm from 800 acres to 3,000 to 3,200. What's an optimal size? How small can you go and how large can you go?
that is highly situational, and I'll tell you more about it in a minute. But what's important is there are three legs on that stool. There's production out in the field, which is the acreage, the scalability that you're initially asking the question about. There's the processing. Consumers don't buy hogs and cows and sheep. They buy beef and pork and lamb. So you've got to convert the field production to something that's monetizable.
Yeah.
And then there's the marketing distribution. And as long as those three legs are the same length, it can be a very low scale in your backyard or very high scale, there's thousands of acres. What's important is keeping it the same. Keeping the three legs in balance. In my case, we had to grow to 3,200 acres because I did not have access to the processing of my livestock. So I had to build USDA inspected red meat slaughter plant and a poultry slaughter plant. And when I did, that necessitated a certain volume of animals I had to put through to make that scale work. I've seen beautiful farms in urban situations where it was just a very small abandoned lot. I've seen beautiful farms this size and probably even bigger. I don't want to get too tied up on exactly what scale it should be. It's got to be in balance.
Got it. Jess, could you jump in and address the question that we touched on earlier about affordable and equitable distribution of products grown on regenerative and sustainable farms? I'm thinking about a piece that I read by Chris Newman, who's a farmer on Sylvan Aqua Farms. Elliot or Joel, if you could drop that into the chat, I highly recommend that you explore his site. It's in the northern neck of Virginia. He's a great writer and blogger, and he shares his own experience with regenerative farming, raising crops and livestock, and poultry. And he wrote a piece said, "Clean food. If you want to save the world, get over yourself." He said, my products are not affordable for me or my neighbors. And we have to be, practical and realistic about promoting models that are not only good for the earth, but affordable and equitable. And I wonder if you can speak to that in your own work and how you manage to reach and serve frontline working class and low income communities.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think I've seen people use sliding scale models. I have seen people use models that they call reparative. And when I say people, I'm thinking of both organic and regenerative farms. I'm thinking of other herbalists and earth workers like myself. And I think that, just as Will was talking about, us understanding that these systems are complex and not necessarily, able to be easily scaled up in some gigantic way. I think that in terms of pricing, that we should be thinking about more complicated models. I'm thinking also of Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New York, who serves, I believe their community, the closest city to them is Albany, which is a place that is, there is, an incredible amount of food apartheid. The majority of the Black and brown population do not have access to fresh food. And so what Soulfire does is they provide basically free or very low cost, affordable food to the communities who are affected by food apartheid. And the way that they do it is that people who have more of an ability to pay, who have more financial abundance, pay more. And so I think that creating systems that are attuned to differing sets of needs. So for myself, I've done sliding scale. I also, when I am abundant, I give things away. And, if someone comes to me and I know that, receiving my services would be a real financial hardship for them, I'll give it away. And I plan into my pricing. Having moments where I do free clinics. And I also work with folks who are directly connected to, for example, one organization I work with does gardening and community organizing with folks who live in a few sets of NYCHA, which is public housing in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. And for that organization, I sometimes do work for free, or I charge a rate that is not what I would charge for a larger, more resourced organization. And when I do workshops with that organization, they're always free to whoever would like to attend them. So in terms of this question of equity and making good food, more affordable, and making plant medicine more affordable, making efforts that help people connect with the earth and connect with their innate power as healers more affordable. I think that, we should be working, mutual aid into our bottom line, and thinking more deeply about what we have to offer, where we're abundant, and who doesn't have abundance. And so, I just think making the picture more complicated.
It's a really important moment. It's the first time I've seen, having covered agriculture for a long time. It's an amazing moment to hear that people in the White House and the Senate talking about mutual aid and the introduction of the Justice for Black Farmers Act, which is proposing a land grant program that would transfer 20 million acres of land to black and brown and farmers and people of color, 160 acres per grant. Will, I want to, and we've seen in the chat a number of questions about the do nothing phrasing that Fukuoka uses. And I'm wondering if you can sort of give us a reality check around, how much is this regenerative farming practices that you use, how much of it is it less work, and how much of it is in fact more work? I know that Fukuoka is pretty clear that he doesn't mean that you don't have to work hard and get blisters and wake up early, but he does focus on what can I take away rather than what can I add. And I would love to hear you speak to that, Will, and then Jess, I would love for you to jump in on that too.
I will, but I'd like to add one more thing. I agree with everything Jess said about getting this good food to people that need it but can't afford it. I have 3 daughters who are in their 30s and they're having babies, and 2 of them work for me, and they don't have a lot of disposable income. Of course, they live on the farm, so they eat well, but if they didn't, they wouldn't, and that's troubling to me. And the things that Jess proposed are great and should be implemented, but I want to give you another spin on it that I think must be considered. I think that to solve a complex problem, you've got to break it up into its parts. That's the holistic approach. And in this case, we're talking about two of the most complex problems that we face today, and we're jamming them together. One of the complex problems is deindustrializing our food production system. And that's a bear. I mean, that's just a lot into that. The other one is economic disparity, and that's a bear. And while the two overlap, I think it's two different problems, two different solutions. And I think that in the short run, we need to do the things that Jess advocated, and we do some of that as well. But I think we need to take the two problems separately and look at them holistically, as opposed, there's not one way to solve both those problems at the same time. It's two different skill sets, two different mindsets. So you asked me the question I kind of was dreading, because the do nothing kind of escapes me. As much as I criticize reductionist science, industrialization of farming, it's provided a lot of tools that make farming easier. Now, they have unintended consequences. It's not better, but it is easier. And maybe this is just my, Western philosophy versus Mr. Fakura's, but my approach is, I don't know that the attainment of food is meant to be easy. When you tell a cheetah chasing a gazelle that it's easy, it may not be easy. Or you tell, 2 or 3 wolves trying to take down a buffalo that attaining food is easy. I mean, it's not easy. And, I see squirrels out foraging for nuts, and, the attainment of food is not necessarily meant to be easy. This is not the Garden of Eden. And farm work, I would say that natural farm work is harder than the industrialized farm work. Now, it's better because it doesn't have the unintended consequences of the animals, the land, the community. But I really can't explain the do nothing part to you. That escaped me.
I want to acknowledge Baranaki for asking that question and the other many questions that you have submitted. Shirley Thompson, I want to get to you too, and please others jump in with your questions. But Jess, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I wonder, I mean, he is emphatic, Will, that he doesn't actually mean, he does talk about his naps a lot and getting to bed early a lot, which was really where I think a lot of my serenity was coming. It's like, that's possible. It sounds great. But Will, he was, I think, saying it's let's stop adding stuff. It's inputs. The industrial farming is, and he talks about the kind of mindset of the do more farmer as let's break the roof and then fix it and celebrate the fact that we fixed it. But we spend all the time breaking it, right? And it's creating problems, again, as Will, you put it beautifully, complications. We just keep more complications and have to create more tools to solve it. And that is just doing more, as opposed to stepping back and saying, what can I not do? It's not the actual physical labor or the number of hours spent necessarily, despite the napping. But Jess, I'm curious about your thoughts on this. What does the do nothing agriculture mean to you, both as in practice and philosophy?
In terms of practice and philosophy, the do nothing farming method is, when you read the book and you look at how Fukuoka talks about cultivating rice, his way of cultivating rice versus the traditional Japanese way of cultivating rice, where, he encloses the rice grain in clay and distributes it into a dry field in the autumn. And then there's also clover, green manure, that's already been established, that's kind of growing. And then in the spring, before the rice comes up, he gives the green manure and the weeds, a small cut. The clover being a nitrogen fixer, it falls to the ground. the nitrogen in the nodes of the clover goes into the ground. And, versus the traditional way where the fields are flooded in the springtime, I believe rice is transplanted in the spring. The farmer has to, weed the fields very carefully several times during that season. So, Fukuoka's do nothing method. It isn't that it doesn't require work or it doesn't require labor. It's just about letting some of the like heavy lifting be done by nature, I would say. That's sort of what I got from his do nothing farming. I mean, philosophically, I think that what his method is about is, he talks again and again about soil fertility and about how, if you look at a forest, which is rich in, humus and in, vegetation from canopy down to the forest floor and even, underground, what is happening is a process of plants and animals growing, their lives coming to an end and them returning to the earth. And so, in the traditional farming method and in the industrial farming method, you're taking from the soil. And what he talks about is, cutting the rice and leaving the hay on the ground, cutting the weeds and leaving the weeds on the ground. It's always about adding to the soil. So I think for me, those farms that I first began working with plants on, seeing the ways that the farmers used what was around to grow whatever was intended for market or for those of us who were living on the farm for our sustenance. And I think do nothing is about working with the land and encouraging these processes of decomposition and building on what nature is already doing, if that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it was beautifully shared. Thank you. And I'm going to give you an assignment from Shirley, which was, could you please select one of your favorite passages from the book and share why it really resonates with you. And while you're doing that, Will, I love, he describes the do nothing agriculture on 46 in my version as creating the kind of resilience and strength in his system, in his soil systems, so that he can step back and let the farm manage itself. And I know, having seen you at work, that you certainly don't step back and let your farm manage itself, but you have talked about the positive feedback loops that you're putting into place and the greater and greater productivity of the farm. And that it's a long view farming, right? That as you build, up the strength of the soil and the livestock aerates and fertilizes the soil, and it becomes more and more productive over time, and you essentially have a much more profitable farm over time. But you had to take some hits near term in shifting away from industrial agriculture, but there was this great long-term promise of increasing, this increasingly positive feedback loop. And I think that's what Fukuoka was going for in his description of, building in that, being able to step back and let the farm manage itself, let these natural ecosystems do what they do so well without interference. Can you speak to that in particular, the long view, the kind of long view farming that you're doing and the way that you are building value on your farm over time?
Yeah, I just wonder if there's some kind of little language discrepancy in the do nothing. The way I would describe it is not do nothing. It is without input, without putting outside inputs in. the great harm of industrialized farming is it breaks the cycles of nature. Cycles of nature, when they're operating properly, yield an abundance. You know, all that oil and coal and natural gas in the earth is the abundance of nature in the era of the dinosaur. All that energy has been stored down there. And it was the abundance of nature. It wasn't uranium. You know, it was the cycles of nature operating optimally. And the cycles of nature include, and let me say, we're not smart enough. We human beings are not smart enough to recognize all the cycles of nature. They're too subtle. But we do recognize the energy cycle with the radiation from the sun, the water cycle with precipitation, the mineral cycle, the carbon cycle, the microbial cycle, the grazing cycle, insect cycle. So many cycles going on out there. That's the complexity.
Yeah.
When they're all operating optimally, that abundance is the only wealth there is. That abundance is what's maintained living creatures on this earth from the beginning.
Yeah, Alfred said, just added to what you were saying, Will, and said, to me, do nothing is a lesson in humility before nature, to work with it rather than master it. I think that ties into this discussion of discriminating versus non-discriminating knowledge. And Will, I love your shift. And you said it's not do nothing, it's add nothing agriculture. And that really speaks to me. And I think that really resonates with what Jess was saying. Now, I can't believe it, but we are now approaching we are passing the 8 o'clock mark, which means we only have 10, 15 minutes here to wrap up. Jess, I know that you wanted to, that you have selected your passage. And I also know that there has been a question as to whether someone could explain, I'm guessing, Jess, you might be a great person to explain this, the food mandala that Fukuoka presents. It may be a different page number for you, but the mandala diagram on page 129. I don't know if you can speak to that after you share your passage. Will, meantime, while Jess is sharing her passage, could you select a passage if you would like, or a story from your that articulates that idea of the greater value you're growing over time, specifically how much more productive per acre your farm is over time, now compared to 5 years ago and 10 years from now compared to today. If you prefer to do that, we would all love to hear that too. But Jess, please share your passage.
Okay, so my favorite passage in the edition I have is on page 113. And he says, whether autumn will bring wind or rain, I cannot know, but today I will be working in the fields. Those are the words of an old country song. They express the truth of farming as a way of life. No matter how the harvest will turn out, whether or not there will be enough food to eat, and simply sowing seed and caring tenderly for plants under nature's guidance, there is joy. So that's my favorite because, yeah, I feel like when we grow seeds, when we pay attention to what's growing around us, even just on our block. I live in New York City, and I am always encouraging people to know the plants that are growing around them that are, disparaged as weeds, and to, greet them as they would their next door neighbor. When you can do that, the joy that arises when you see, a being that it really can't be described in words. And I think cultivating relationships with living beings that, appear as plants really helps us cultivate this joy that Fukuoka is talking about. Now, in terms of the mandalas, I did not get to reread and ponder that as closely as I would have liked. However, I think that those mandalas are just about, they're like relational maps. They're about how we connect, how the beings that we rely on for food, for sustenance, for medicine, how they are related to one another. Yeah, but maybe
Yeah.
someone else has a better
Yes,
understanding.
I would encourage, I'm a bit out of my depth as it relates to food mandalas, but I would encourage anyone who has knowledge on this front to jump in. Will, as you are sharing your, and thank you, by the way, Jess, for that passage. It was just, it was perfect. Will, as you are sharing your either anecdote or passage, I wanted to mention, probably many, or if not most of you have seen Kiss the Ground, this documentary that was released a few months ago about regenerative farming and its great power and relevance right now, especially as it relates to climate. And one of the facts that that I want to share from that is, for every 1% increase in organic matter, an acre of soil can draw down 10 more tons of carbon. And Will was comparing the, the organic matter content of his farm to his neighbor's farm is 5% compared to 0.15% or something like that. Dramatic differences, not in just the amount of, the productivity and the quality of plants that can grow on that soil, but in the role that it can play in carbon sequestration, and which is just hugely relevant right now, obviously. But Will, if you can kind of give us a sense of that, of this, the fact that it continues to increase over time. The system, you step back and let it go, as Fukuoka said, let it manage itself. And it's just this, law of increasing returns as opposed to law of diminishing returns in industrial ag. Can you speak to that with any more specificity?
Yeah, I think I'll try. So I believe that our farm draws down the equivalent of 7 barrels of oil per acre per year. That's the calculations a scientist friend of mine did. And 1% organic matter in the soil will absorb like a sponge about 20,000 gallons of water per acre. And that's a 1-inch rain event. So my neighbor's is 0.5. His land can hold a 0.5% organic matter, and mine will hold a half inch rain. Mine will absorb a 5-inch rain event. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to clarify something that if I were an industrial farmer trying to find a problem with this work, I want to lift it up and explain why it's not a problem. So Mr. Fukuoka talks a lot about comparing his yield to the industrial yield, his natural farming yield to the industrial yield. And in most cases, it's as good as, which really means it's better, because you didn't spend the money to buy those artificial inputs and you didn't have the unintended consequences from it. So that's great. But now in truth, that was 50 years ago. And today there are inputs that you can put on your crop that would get the yield above what a natural farming system would yield. In the same way that if you go to the gym and work out and take steroids, you can get more benefit from the workout, although it's with a lot of unintended negative consequences. So my point was going to be the economics is the same. If even though the yields can be jacked up and then the price jacked up by using these artificial inputs, if you calculated the externalized cost, the damage to the land and the water and the animals, then it would cause the natural farming system to be a much better gain despite that. Things have changed a little bit in terms of the technology, and I just want to be sure that was said out loud here as opposed to being shot down by somebody from the industrial complex.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask Will. He says in no uncertain terms toward the end of the book that industrial farming will fail. And one could argue that it has failed. One could argue that it has not failed, that it has flourished. I mean, after the writing of this book, it grew exponentially in terms of certainly profit and output, but whether it is just on the brink of catastrophic failure, and by the way, I'm well aware that that profits are hugely propped up by subsidies, and it wouldn't be very profitable without those subsidies. But can you speak to that? Do you think, Jess and Will, that industrial farming, it will inevitably fail if left to its own devices, that it's just self-destructing essentially?
Yeah, it will. It will. You remember in the Great Recession how AIG and the other businesses, they said it was too big to fail. You remember that term being used?
Yeah.
The fact is, you can be so big, you cannot help but fail. When something is scaled and up in a linear manner, more and more and more, get greater and greater and greater efficiencies, all that while shedding resilience, it can't help but fail. Because I'm one of the few people in this movement that used to be a good old boy industrial farmer that became part of this kinder, gentler agriculture. Most people came to it from somewhere else. I came to it from the inside. So I still talk to those people, and they want to talk about yield per acre. And the truth is, they can produce more yield per acre than I can. With today's technology, they can accept it. But so if land's a limiting factor, they have a better farming scheme than I do. But if petroleum is a limiting factor, I win.
Yeah.
If water is a limiting factor, I win. If antibiotics that the pathogens aren't immune to, I win. If the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is a limiting factor, I win. If global warming, I can go on with dozens of scenarios in which our farming system is far more resilient and will take us further down the road. I think we have to acknowledge that the earth has a carrying capacity. It can't feed more and more and more people exponentially, population in perpetuity. It can't do that. But the farming system we employ will get us further down that road than what we're doing today. And the pandemic panic showed us that.
Yes. And what we've heard the Biden administration proposing a carbon bank that would pay, I think it's $20 per pound of carbon drawn down per acre or something like that. I can't remember the metrics of it. But yes, if not, you will win in all those circumstances, and you will especially win if you start getting paid by the government or the private sector for sequestering carbon. And that's a whole other topic for another time. I have noticed that that in the chat there are so many other great insights and questions that we need to bring into this. I'm hearing the children running up the stairs and beginning to pound on the door. So forgive me if there's like it's an influx of other people in the room in a second. But Jess, I want you to have the last word. And I really strongly encourage every one of you who's still with us. Thank you for sticking around, and I strongly encourage you to go to whiteoakpastures.com and olaminabotanicals.com and support these amazing pioneers in sustainable food production and holistic care. It is so important to help them do what they are doing. And I am going directly to Olamina after this. I have already got half of my freezer stocked with Will's products, which I drove. They did not fly to my house. We are pretty close. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, so they're kind of local. But yes, the Will's meats are pretty amazing and carbon negative, according to the latest science. But Jess, I'm so excited to get to know your business and to support it, and and really just greatly admire what you're doing. And I would love to leave it to you, and anything else that we haven't been able to talk about that you think we should note and put out there before we turn in for the night.
Wow. Something that came up as Will was speaking and related to the last question that was asked, in terms of, is the system, is industrial agriculture, is it destined to fail? I mean, it's already failing us. And, I thought of Anna Singh, who has this book, The Mushroom at the End of the World. She was in conversation with, I can't remember the name of the institution, but she was talking about plantation capitalism and talking about the system, which is based on uniformity and on boiling, nature and life down to the simplest factors, and how, if you look at what brought down, these huge and profitable plantations, which, still exist today. If you look at the way that bananas are grown, if you look at the way that sugarcane is grown, is blight, is disease. And if you have hundreds and thousands of acres where you're growing the same crop, that, one pest can come in and wipe everything out. And so I think that, what the One Straw Revolution is speaking to is the need for us to move away from these extractive systems, these systems that bankrupt the land and bankrupt our vision. We're all here, I think, because we agree that these ways aren't sustainable. Also one more thing is I want to encourage people to read this book as a wild foods manifesto. Fukuoka talks again and again about how he scatters seeds, and sometimes he harvests them and sometimes he doesn't, and he'll come in the fields to something that he can't quite recognize, but it's actually a carrot, and he tastes it and it's bitter and it tastes like, the distant wild relatives of the foods that we know of as carrots today. And there's been tons of research that has shown that medicinal plants that are harvested in the wild or harvested from fields that are rich with weeds have more potent medicinal constituents. There have been studies that have come out about folks who eat like a rich diet made up of foraged food. So I just want to encourage people who live in cities to, find places where it's about to be spring, chickweed and burdock and things like that are growing, and like harvest them, make salads. I think eating wild foods, eating weeds is an important way that we can address some of the issues that we've been talking about tonight.
Jess, I love that all came out at the end. It's so important, and I should have asked you about that at the beginning. And I will say that as you were saying that, it made me think about the great paradox in this work, that the more complex and richly diverse the system and the land, the ecosystem that he's working with, the simpler his thinking became, right? Like there was this beautiful sort of inversely proportionate relationship between greater variety and diversity in the natural system, and simpler and clearer thinking in his own mind and his own practices. And I think, and you really spoke to that so well in your first comment, Jess, about why this matters now, and why, and as we're thinking about what it means to restore and protect and elevate diversity in our thinking, societally and agriculturally. How that brings, it's so simple. It's so simple. And it's so essential, and that really came through in your comment. Thank you all so much. And because we still have such a critical mass of people who are here, I kind of thought that there would be like 3 of us left at this point. Will, I do feel like I should also say, is there anything else that you would like to share before we all turn in for the night?
Just thank you for having me here. I enjoyed it, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. Yes, my daughter is here, and she's going, oh my gosh, it's Will Harris, the great one and only, because she came with me to visit his farm, and we rode around in his Rubicon Jeep and played with his goats. and yes, and anyway, it's amazing. Everyone who wants to get down to Bluffton, Georgia, please go visit White Oak Pastures, and Jess, I cannot wait to come to New York and meet you in person and see the great work you're doing in person, and taste some wild herbs with you. So thank you all, and thank you especially to Joel and Elliot for bringing us all together, and thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you so much, Amanda, Jess, Will. I could listen to you for hours and hours more. What great conversationalists and thinkers you are. It was a real pleasure. We had Naomi Klein on here with members of Sunrise talking last night, and this program made me just as happy as that one did. Thanks so much to Writers Rebel and Carrie for putting together this year-long book list. Thanks, Elliot, for your help on the questions, the reader's guide. Thanks to all the members, including Pachaya, who's here and whose novel we're going to be talking about next month, Bangkok Wakes to Rain, on March 23rd, I believe. You can RSVP to that. It's in the chat, which is going to go away soon. Also, you can find us on BPL Presents after bklynlibrary.org. Thank you all so much for being here, and we hope to see you again next month.
And thank you to the member of our audience who proposed the next book title, my next book title.
Oh yeah.
Add Nothing Agriculture. Yeah, that's that I knew that I would get inspiration out of this. I did not know I'd get a book title, so hooray. Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody, and I hope we meet again.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Good night.